Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, July 12, 2022. A former supporter of Donald Trump who pled guilty to illegally entering the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, tells the House Select Committee investigating the violent attack that day that he was only there because former President Trump asked people like him to show up, and that he regrets it. The committee also hearing from a former spokesman of the group Oath Keepers who says, "We are exceedingly lucky that more bloodshed did not happen." And airing publicly for the first time portions of the taped interview with former President Trump's White House counsel Pat Cipollone, who says he tried to convince Donald Trump to concede and did not support the legal theories that would allow the election to be overturned by Vice President Mike Pence. Coming up, portions of today's hearing, and we'll talk about it with Washington Post reporter Leigh Caldwell. Also today, White House COVID-19 response leaders confronting the rapid spread of a new Omicron subvariant, and under consideration, expanding second booster shot eligibility to all adults. President Joe Biden meeting with the President of Mexico at the White House. This comes a month after the Mexican president declined an invitation to the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. And NASA releasing more extraordinary Webb telescope color photos of deep space. From the Associated Press, the January 6th committee on Tuesday divulged details of an unhinged late-night meeting at the White House with defeated President Donald Trump's outside lawyers suggesting the military seize state voting machines in a last-ditch effort to pursue his false claims of voter fraud before he summoned a mob to the U.S. Capitol. The committee investigating last year's attack at the Capitol is working to show how far right extremists answered Trump's call to come to a big rally in Washington. As dozens of lawsuits and his claims of voter fraud fizzled, Trump met late into the night of December 18th with attorneys at the White House before tweeting the rally invitation, "Be there, will be wild." Members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers groups are now facing rare sedition charges over the siege. That from Associated Press. One of the live witnesses at today's hearing of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol, a former Trump supporter who has pled guilty to entering the Capitol that day, Stephen Ayers. Some questions from the committee chair, Benny Thompson, Democrat from Mississippi, and the vice chair, Liz Cheney, Republican from Wyoming.
Mr. Ayers, why did you decide to come to Washington on January 6th?
For me personally, I was, pretty hardcore into the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I followed, President Trump, on all of the websites, He basically put out, come to Stop the Steal rally, and I felt like I needed to be down here.
So you basically learned about the rally on social media and at some point made a decision to come to Washington.
Yep. I had some friends I found out were coming down, and I just hopped on with them right at the tail end when I found out and came down here with them.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the vice chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any questions that she may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ayers, when you entered the Capitol last year, did you believe that the election had been stolen?
At that time, yeah. Everything that I was seeing online, I definitely believed that that's exactly what that was the case.
And when you heard from President Trump that the election was stolen, how did that make you feel?
Oh, I was very upset, as were most of his supporters. That's basically what got me to come down here.
And do you still believe the election was stolen?
Not so much now. I got away from all the social media when January 6th happened. Basically deleted it all. I started doing my own research and everything. And for me, for something like that to be that, for that to actually take place, it's too big. There's no way you can keep something like that quiet, as big as something like that. With all the lawsuits being shot down one after another, that was mainly what convinced me.
Well, and I think that's very important. And we've also talked about today and in previous hearings the extent to which the president himself was told that the election hadn't been stolen by his Justice Department, by his White House counsel, by his campaign. Would it have made a difference to you to know that President Trump himself had no evidence of widespread fraud?
Oh, definitely. You know, who knows? I may not have come down here then, you know.
Stephen Ayers questioned by Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Before that, Congressman Benny Thompson, the House January 6 committee hearing today. New York Times reports that Ayers was arrested in Ohio and pleaded guilty in June to a misdemeanor charge of disorderly and disruptive conduct in a restricted building. He's scheduled to be sentenced in September. Another witness today, Jason Van Tatenhove, was a former spokesman for the group Oath Keepers. Here are the questions from committee member Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland.
In the run-up to January 6, Stuart Rhodes publicly implored President Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act, the 1807 law that allows the president to call up militias to put down a rebellion against the United States. And I want to get your thoughts about this in the context of your prior relationship with Stuart Rhodes. I understand that you had conversations with Rhodes about the Insurrection Act. Why was he so fixated on that, and what did he think it would enable the Oath Keepers to do?
Well, I think it gave him a sense of legitimacy, that it was a path forward to move forward with his goals and agendas. I think we need to quit mincing words and just talk about truths. And what it was going to be was an armed revolution. I mean, people died that day. Law enforcement officers died this day. There was a gallows set up in front of the Capitol. This could have been the spark that started a new civil war, and no one would have won there. That would have been good for no one. He was always looking for ways to legitimize what he was doing, whether by wrapping it in the trappings of it's not a militia, it's a community preparedness team. We're not a militia, we're an educational outreach group. It's a veteran support group. But again, we've got to stop with this dishonesty and the mincing of words and just call things for what they are. You know, he's a militia leader. He had these grand visions of being a paramilitary leader, and the Insurrection Act would have given him a path forward with that. You know, the fact that the president was communicating, whether directly or indirectly, messaging, you know, kind of that gave him the nod. And all I can do is thank the gods that things did not go any worse.
Jason Van Tatenhove, former spokesman for the group Oath Keepers, and Stuart Rhodes, they're referring to, is its founder. Question today by Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, House January 6 committee hearing. Today's hearing also featuring video clips from Friday's taped deposition with Pat Cipollone, former White House counsel to President Trump. Among the topics he covers, the theory that Vice President Mike Pence had the power to single-handedly overturn the Electoral College vote that day, showing that Democrat Joe Biden had defeated Republican Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election. Introducing the clips, committee member Stephanie Murphy, Democrat from Florida.
According to White House visitor logs obtained by the committee, members of Congress present at the White House on December 21st included Congressman Brian Babin, Andy Biggs, Matt Gaetz, Louis Gohmert, Paul Gosar, Andy Harris, Jody Heiss, Jim Jordan, and Scott Perry. Then Congresswoman-elect Marjorie Taylor Greene was also there. We heard testimony in an earlier hearing that a pardon was ultimately requested by Congressman Mo Brooks and other members of Congress who attended this meeting. We've asked witnesses what happened during the December 21st meeting, and we've learned that part of the discussion centered on the role of the vice president during the counting of the electoral votes. These members of Congress were discussing what would later be known as the Eastman theory, which was being pushed by attorney John Eastman. In one of our earlier hearings, you heard in great detail that President Trump was trying to convince Vice President Pence to do something illegal. His White House counsel confirmed all of that in testimony last week.
Your view, Mr. Cipollone, upon those discussions with Mr. Philbin, with Greg Jacob, what was your assessment as to what the Vice President could or could not do at the joint session?
What was my assessment about what he could or couldn't do?
Yes, your view of the issue.
My view was that the Vice President didn't have the legal authority to do anything except what he did.
They've both told us, Mr. Philbin and Mr. Jacob, that they looked very closely at the Eastman memos, the Eastman theory, and thought that it had no basis, that it was not a strategy that the president should pursue. It sounds like that's consistent with your impression as well.
My impression would have been informed certainly by them.
Campaign senior advisor Jason Miller told us that Mr. Cipollone thought John Eastman's theories were nutty, something Mr. Cipollone wouldn't refute.
We've received testimony from various people about this. One was Jason Miller, who was a campaign, said that Webb's communicated to me was that Pat Cipollone thought the idea was nutty, and at one point confronted Eastman basically with the same sentiment.
I don't have any reason to contradict what he said.
On January 4th, John Eastman went to the White House to meet with the president and vice president. Mr. Cipollone tried to participate in this meeting, but he was apparently turned away.
You didn't go to the meeting in the Oval Office where Eastman met with the president and with the vice president. Do you remember why you didn't personally attend?
I did walk to that meeting, and I did go into the Oval Office with the idea of attending that meeting, and then I ultimately did not attend that meeting.
Why not?
The reasons for that are privilege.
Okay. Were you asked to not attend the meeting, or did you make a personal decision not to attend the meeting?
Again, without getting into privilege.
Recall that Greg Jacob, the vice president's counsel, stated that Mr. Eastman acknowledged he would lose 9-0 if his legal theory were challenged in the Supreme Court. Mr. Cipollone had reviewed Mr. Eastman's legal theory and expressed his view repeatedly that the vice president was right. He even offered to take the blame for the vice president's position.
I thought that the vice president did not have the authority to do what was being suggested under a proper reading of the law. I conveyed that. Okay. I think I actually told somebody, in the vice president's, just blame me. I'm not a politician. I just said, I'm a lawyer. This is my legal opinion. But let me tell you this. Can I say a word about the vice president?
Please.
I think the vice president did the right thing. I think he did the courageous thing. I have a great deal of respect for Vice President Pence. I worked with him very closely. I think he understood my opinion. I think he understood my opinion afterwards as well. I think he did a great service to this country. And I think I suggested to somebody that he should be given the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his actions.
The videotaped testimony of former White House counsel under President Trump, Pat Cipollone, at the House January 6th committee hearing. Introduction of the clips by committee member Stephanie Murphy, Democrat from Florida. With more on today's January 6th committee hearing, we're joined on the phone by Leigh Caldwell, Washington Post Live anchor and co-author of the Early 202 newsletter. Thank you for being with us. What did we learn today?
Well, thanks for having me. This is yet another pretty explosive hearing from the January 6th Select Committee. After every hearing, or before every hearing, I think that there's not much more we can learn, but once again, they proved us wrong, and there is a lot more that we did learn today. What the committee really tried to do is to show that Donald Trump was directing through social media and, even some people who were close to him, attempts to overturn or to interrupt the counting of the Electoral College votes in the Capitol on January 6th. They showed that there were people who decided to come to the Capitol, members of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, because of what he put out on social media. He also, what they also showed is that his decision to kind of tell people to come to the Capitol came after an hours-long explosive meeting in mid-December where there were two camps in that room, one of, kind of these hanger-oners like Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, who were trying to say that the election was stolen. And then you had Trump's actual legal counsel, like Pat Cipollone. They had showed videos of his testimony where he said that was absolutely not the case, that they needed to provide evidence if it was, and they had none, and that meeting was extremely tense, fraught, explosive, lots of yelling. And then after that hours-long meeting, after midnight, Trump decided that he put out a tweet and what people are describing as calling the troops to Washington, D.C., the people who supported him.
That testimony from the former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, recorded last week, there was a lot of buildup to that. We heard just a bit of it. Is there more to come?
Yeah, that's a great question, probably because there's more hearings to come. And the fact that, Pat Cipollone decided to cooperate with the committee after Cassidy Hutchinson, the former top aide to Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, testified a couple of weeks ago saying that, had all sorts of details of the inner workings of, how Trump acted, what he thought, what he was told, what Mark Meadows did and did not do. And then Pat Cipollone decided that he would come forward and testify. And the committee, that was part of their intention, that if Cassidy Hutchinson came public with what she knew, then maybe perhaps Pat Cipollone would do the same, because he had decided not to cooperate with the committee up until that point. And so the fact that they were able to depose Pat Cipollone, record his deposition, and then turn around and play it just a few days later, it was really critical and instrumental to the committee. And we could very well see more. We'll have to see.
There's been some interesting speculation this week surrounding former White House advisor to President Trump, Steve Bannon, who is now offered to testify publicly. Has the committee indicated one way or the other whether they want that?
It doesn't seem like that is the route that the committee is going to take. The committee says that they don't just talk to someone for the first time in a public hearing. People are deposed via lawyers, not the committee members are part of it, but the lawyers lead those depositions. They are under oath. And so it is extremely unlikely that the committee will, in fact, allow Steve Bannon to come testify for the first time in a public setting. And it's interesting that Steve Bannon came forward with that at a time not only when his own court case with the Department of Justice was approaching, but also after the former president, after Donald Trump, had been complaining very loudly that there was no Republican, no supporters on the committee or publicly out defending him in that realm of a committee hearing. And so Steve Bannon could be that person to do that job, but the committee is most likely not going to allow that.
We're talking with Leigh Caldwell from the Washington Post. Looking ahead to the next hearing, we also found out this week that what we thought would be a hearing on Thursday, prime time, has now been put off. Do we know any more about that and what the topic will be? And also, at the end, Vice Chair of the committee, Liz Cheney, talking about former President Trump contacting a witness.
Yeah. So as far as, with the hearing, the hearing that was postponed, even though it hadn't been officially announced, it's expected to be next week, but we'll see. It has also not been officially announced for next week, and the committee has changed their schedule multiple times. The last primetime hearing, though, is supposed to be, kind of a roundup of what we learned and also a minute-by-minute detail of what happened on January 6th. We'll see that could change, too, especially as the committee is continuing to gather evidence and information. But for the second hearing in a row, we have now learned that because of what Liz Cheney or Benny Thompson has said at the end of hearings, is that they are alleging witness tampering on behalf of by the president and his supporters. We heard about that after the hearing at the end of the hearing with Cassidy Hutchinson. And then again, Liz Cheney said that there is another instance of witness tampering where the president tried to call a witness. And so that is also going to be really important information, perhaps, that the Department of Justice would like, as we now also know that the Department of Justice is expanding its probe into the president or January 6th and the lead up into it and the people surrounding him.
Leigh Caldwell, Washington Post live anchor, co-author of the early 202 newsletter. Find her work at WashingtonPost.com and on Twitter at LACaldwellDC. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And here is what Congresswoman Liz Cheney, vice chair of the January 6th committee, said at the end.
After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us, and this committee has supplied that information to the Department of Justice. Let me say one more time, we will take any effort to influence witness testimony very seriously.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Washington Today continues in a moment.
C-SPAN has unfiltered coverage of the House January 6 committee hearings investigating the attack on the Capitol. Go to cspan.org/January6, our web resource page, to watch the latest videos of the hearings, briefings, and all of our coverage on the attack and subsequent investigation since January 6, 2021. We'll also have reaction from members of Congress and the White House, as well as journalists and authors talking about the investigation. Go to cspan.org/January6 for a fast and easy way to watch when you can't see it live.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. A story at the New York Times. President Biden's coronavirus response team warned Americans on Tuesday that they must do more to protect themselves against COVID-19 as the highly transmissible BA.5 subvariant of the coronavirus fuels a new wave of infections, reinfections, and hospitalizations across the country. BA.5, an offshoot of the Omicron variant, is now dominant among new U.S. cases. The White House has been watching it march across Europe and South Africa, and on Tuesday, the response team outlined its strategy to combat the subvariant, which appears to be able to evade vaccines, as well as immune system defenses built up through prior infection. That's from the New York Times. Dr. Ashish Jha is the White House COVID-19 response coordinator leading today's virtual briefing.
We are closely monitoring BA.5 and its impact. We're encouraged that serious illness, hospitalizations, and deaths have remained relatively low based on the level of infections. That's not by coincidence, by the way. It's not random. It's in large part due to our successful vaccination program, our efforts to get people boosted, and our incredibly focused effort on making sure that treatments and testing are widely available. But let me make another really important point. We are experiencing about 300 to 350 deaths a day. That is unacceptable. It's too high. And we will continue to use the infrastructure we have built and the tools we have to lower suffering and death as we manage BA.5. And it is clear that with every American doing their part, we can get through the BA.5 infections together.
Dr. Ashish Jha, White House COVID-19 response coordinator at today's virtual briefing. He also emphasized wearing masks in crowded places as an effective way of dealing with this subvariant surge. More from the New York Times article. It has this: as part of the strategy to combat BA.5, federal officials are considering expanding eligibility for second coronavirus booster shots to adults under 50, according to several people familiar with the thinking. Reporter asking Dr. Jha about this today. You're also going to hear an answer from Dr. Anthony Fauci, the White House chief science advisor.
In terms of opening up boosters to people under 50 or to all adults, let me be very clear. We have conversations all the time about what are possible things we can be doing to better protect the American people. So those conversations have been going on for a while. We are also very, very clear, I am very, very clear, that these are decisions made by our regulatory agencies, the FDA and the CDC. And so I know that the FDA is considering this, looking at it, and I know CDC scientists are thinking about this and looking at the data as well. The decision is purely up to them. But those conversations, as I said, along with a whole lot of other conversations, we're always thinking about what else can we be doing to protect the American people. So let me just say again that decision here really is an FDA and CDC decision. Tony, anything else to add on that?
Well, Ashish, just to underscore what you said, we are a team here. The FDA is part of the team. The CDC is part of the team. The White House group is part of the team. We're all part of a team, and we discuss this continually. But as Dr. Jha said, we also have the situation where there are certain elements of the team that are the decision makers. And in this case, it's a regulatory decision on the part of the FDA, and the CDC will examine it with regard to whether or not they'll recommend it or allow it or what have you. So we always talk about it. It's not something new, but we all recognize what the lines of authority are, and that's what we'll be depending on.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, also head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, in addition to being the chief White House science advisor. And you heard from Dr. Ashish Jha, White House COVID-19 response coordinator. Daily coronavirus cases in the U.S. now about 100,000, but hospitalizations are up 20% over the past couple of weeks, according to the New York Times tracker. StatNews.com has this. Food and Drug Administration last month recommended that vaccine makers add a component of the spike protein from BA.5 and BA.4, the two sublineages have essentially identical spike proteins, to their original vaccine formulations, creating a bivalent shot that could be used for a fall booster campaign. That was from Stat News. Today, Dr. Jha confirmed the vaccine is being readied for the fall.
We don't have exact timing. Again, we're just, obviously just a couple of weeks ago was when FDA made its recommendation around getting a BA.4, BA.5 bivalent. So we don't have exact timing. Our expectation is that it'll happen sometime in early October. Could be a little earlier, could be a little later. These vaccines are being built now. And the entire 105 million doses will not show up on day one. So there will be a rollout period here where I expect some Americans will get it in October if everything sticks to timeline. Others will get it in November or December.
Dr. Ashish Jha. Wall Street today, the Dow down 192, NASDAQ down 107, S&P down 35. Twitter today officially suing Elon Musk to try to force the Tesla CEO to complete his $44 billion acquisition of the social media platform. Musk on Friday said he was ending the agreement because Twitter had not given him enough information on bots on the platform. A judge in the business specialized Delaware Chancellery Court will now determine whether the reasons for exiting the binding contract are legitimate. If not, Musk could be compelled to complete the purchase, price $54.20 per share. The U.S. Senate confirming Steve Dettelbach to be the head of ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The Senate vote 48-46, mostly along party lines. Democrats voting yes, 2 Republicans joining them, Susan Collins of Maine, Rob Portman of Ohio. Steve Dettelbach is from Ohio, and ahead of the vote, the other senator from Ohio, Democrat Sherrod Brown, spoke on the Senate floor.
The bipartisan gun safety bill was important. A long overdue process for progress, finally. Today we have the opportunity to keep up that work together and take another important step in protecting Americans from violent gun crimes by confirming a permanent ATF director. I urge my colleagues to support President Biden's nominee, Steve Dettelbach from Cleveland, to the Director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. No better person for this role than Steve Dettelbach, a son of Ohio, a career public servant with the experience and the record to combat violent crime and keep Americans safe. As U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, Steve worked with law enforcement, including ATF, to prosecute tough cases. I've known Steve Dettelbach for years. I've watched him tackle some of the Department of Justice's most sensitive cases, cases at the intersection of law enforcement and civil rights. He prosecuted a white supremacist who tried to burn down First Azusa Apostolic Faith Church, a predominantly black church in my wife's home county of Ashtabula in a community named Conneaut, Ohio. Steve not only prosecuted the man responsible, he helped create a clergy group, United Against Hate. When he prosecuted the firebombing of the largest mosque in Northwest Ohio, Steve, a practicing Jew, attended worship services there as a show of solidarity. He's lived the value of religious freedom. He's consistently stood up against extremism and hate. Steve Dettelbach understands that politics must play no role in running the ATF. His experience, his record bear that out. It's why he has broad support from across the ideological spectrum, including prosecutors, including law enforcement officials who understand what it takes to do this job.
Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio, on the Senate floor today before the vote to confirm Steve Dettelbach as ATF director. Again, that vote was 48 to 46. Dettelbach is the first Senate-confirmed director leading the ATF since 2015. C-SPAN's Craig Kaplan, Capitol Hill producer, tweeting ATF has only had one Senate-confirmed director, B. Todd Jones, in the Obama administration since the post required Senate confirmation by 2006 law. This from Reuters. President Joe Biden on Tuesday called migration a shared hemispheric challenge in a meeting with Mexico's leader, while also saying the two countries would make infrastructure investments at the border and work to disrupt drug smuggling. The meeting at the White House comes a month after the Mexican president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, skipped the U.S.-hosted Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles to protest President Biden's decision to exclude the leftist governments of Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. Here's part of President Biden's statement in the Oval Office.
Our nations share close ties and family and friendship, and we're united through our values and our history.
Y en realidad nuestros países tienen lazos de familia, de amistad, de amigos, y en realidad compartimos los mismos valores y estamos enlazados a través de la historia.
And for me and my administration, the U.S.-Mexico relationship is vital to achieve our goals of everything from the fight against COVID-19 to continuing to grow our economies to strengthening our partnerships and addressing migration as a shared hemispheric challenge.
Y en realidad mi gobierno y personalmente nosotros consideramos que la relación de Estados Unidos y México es una relación vital, fundamental, y para poder lograr nuestros objetivos, uno de los cuales, por ejemplo, es la lucha en contra de la COVID-19, el desarrollo económico y también la lucha o el abordar el tema de la migración y también todos los temas comunes que nos afectan.
Addressing migration is a hemispheric challenge, a commitment captured in the Los Angeles Declaration adopted by the Summit of the Americas.
Y en realidad el tema de la migración es un tema hemisférico y es un concepto que fue captado en la declaración de la cumbre de Los Ángeles cuando se celebró.
And Mr. President, this is a relationship that directly impacts the daily lives of our people. And despite the overhyped headlines that we sometimes see, you and I have a strong and productive relationship.
President Joe Biden in the White House Oval Office with the visiting president of Mexico, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, who's also known as AMLO. And he spoke as well. The Los Angeles Times White House reporter Eli Stogels tweeted this: "Extraordinary. AMLO has been speaking for 25 minutes in the Oval, offering Biden a lengthy soliloquy about the New Deal, gas prices, and opportunities for greater economic collaboration. He's still going." Here's a few minutes of that speech.
I have come to see you to express on behalf of the Mexican people our disposal. our willingness to work together for the well-being of our nations.
Esta no será la primera ni la última ocasión en que cerremos filas para ayudarnos mutuamente.
This will not be the first nor the last occasion on which we close ranks to help each other mutually.
A pesar de nuestras diferencias y de agravios que no resultan fácil de olvidar ni con el tiempo ni con los buenos deseos, en muchas ocasiones hemos podido coincidir y trabajar como buenos amigos y verdaderos aliados.
In spite of our differences and also in spite of our grievances that are not really easy to forget with time or with good wishes. They're not easy to forget. However, on many occasions, we've been able to coincide and we've been able to work together as good friends and true allies.
Durante el gobierno del presidente Franklin Delano Roosevelt, se hizo patente una política que nosotros consideramos eficaz y fraterna.
During President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration, we were able to see a policy that we believe it was a very efficient and very fraternal policy.
Eran otros tiempos, pero existían circunstancias parecidas a las actuales.
Those were other times. However, we had circumstances that were quite similar to our existing circumstances.
Y de esa política debemos extraer buenas lecciones, porque la historia es la maestra de la vida.
And from those policies, we should be extracting good lessons, because history is the master of life.
Cuando el presidente Roosevelt llegó a la presidencia, el 4 de marzo de 1933,
When President Roosevelt took office, March 4th, 1933,
Estados Unidos padecía una de las crisis económicas y sociales más profundas de su historia.
the United States was going through one of the most profound social and economic crises of its history.
Through an interpreter, the Mexican President Obrador, part of his half-hour remarks in the White House Oval Office with President Biden. Another tweet about this from LA Times White House reporter Eli Stokel's. Most awkward part was when AMLO, the nickname for the Mexican president, told Biden Mexico is letting Americans cross the border to buy gas because it's $1 cheaper per gallon. Biden, when he finally finished after 31 minutes, reminded him that the U.S. economic growth is leading the world. And seen. Those last two words also in the tweet. While that meeting was going on at the White House, First Lady Jill Biden was hosting the First Lady of Mexico in Washington, touring the Library of Congress, among other things. This morning, Jill Biden's press secretary tweeting an apology for Jill Biden's remarks on Tuesday at the Unidos U.S. annual conference in San Antonio, during which Joe Biden said the Hispanic community was as unique as breakfast tacos. The tweet from her press secretary, Michael LaRosa, the First Lady apologizes that her words conveyed anything but pure admiration and love for the Latino community. This from ABC News. NASA scientists said the images and data that will be collected from the James Webb Space Telescope will be groundbreaking in our understanding of the universe. NASA released 5 new images with never-before-seen detail of exoplanets, stars, nebulae, and galaxies in the universe. And at a news conference, Jane Rigby, the operations project scientist for the telescope, said she cried from happiness after seeing the first images that Webb captured.
Bill Horowitz, CBS News, and this, I'm not sure who to ask this, maybe Jane or Amber. Can you talk about when you saw the actual data and your impressions or your anticipation going in? What I'm trying to understand your reactions as both astronomers and human beings to seeing this thing turn this dream into reality for you. In other words, did it match that? Did the reality match the dream? Do you view this as an incremental step forward for astronomy, or is it, the kind of revolutionary step that Hubble was back in its day? Can y'all just give us a little perspective on Well, anyway, you got it. You get
Sure.
what I'm saying.
Okay. Let me take that. Okay. So I'm one of the 3 commissioning scientists, so I've seen a lot, maybe most of the data that's come down during the 6-month commissioning period. And I will say that for me, earlier than this, that the first focused images that we took, where they were razor sharp, that for me was the one where I had the very emotional reaction of, oh my goodness, it works. And it works better than we thought. And shortly after that, we got a standard star so we could measure how much light was going through the telescope. And that's not pretty, it's just a star, but like, oh my gosh, it really does work. And so for me, definitely, it was I think, personally, I went and had an ugly cry, okay? Because it works, what the engineers have done to build this thing, it is amazing. We have an amazing engineering team, and across the board, we beat spec. Some of those engineers are in this room right now, Mike Menzel and his team, they beat spec again and again and again. So I will say, it was a combination of giddy in the room, looking at the data, oh my God, this is great, and then going and having a little sob, because it works. As far as what does this mean, the first thing I did when I came on this project 11 years ago was I made a plot of how deep is this telescope supposed to go versus what does everybody else do? And because nobody had made that plot. I was like, I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. I was like, oh my gosh, we're 2 orders of magnitude more sensitive than other telescopes. And it goes to 3, right? Okay, how could you not discover stuff if you're 100 times more powerful than previous telescopes? So from the data that I've seen so far, from the work that we've seen in commissioning, which is all commissioning data, and then this first week of science, yeah, this is going to be revolutionary. These are incredible capabilities that we've never had before.
Jane Rigby, Webb Telescope Operations Project Scientist at today's NASA News Conference held at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. This from Associated Press. With one exception, the latest images showed parts of the universe seen by other telescopes, but Webb's sheer power, distant location off Earth, and use of the infrared light spectrum showed them in a new light. NASA Administrator Bill Richardson said on Tuesday, when the first images were released at a briefing for the president and vice president, every image is a new discovery, and each will give humanity a view of the humanity that we've never seen before. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. For more Washington top stories emailed to you every day, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.